Hi, my name is Mike Callahan. Welcome to another lesson from the easel. In this lesson, I want to talk about this painting that I just finished called Harbinger of Inevitability. It's hard to say. Harbinger of Inevitability. And in the last video, I talked a lot about how I came up with the concept and how I came up with the idea. In this video, I want to talk about how I painted this without becoming overwhelmed by all the details. And I know that's easy thing to happen to artists. It's really easy for that to happen. And so I want to talk to you a little bit, hopefully help you out, and talk to you a little bit about my procedure and how it can be done without being really overwhelmed. So when you look at this, you see there's so many layers of details, and how is it that you keep from being overwhelmed? And I want to give you a word of caution, because I think it's a kind of a sad reflection on our society in general that we don't have very long attention spans. And I see a lot of artists who start a painting and they start painting this, and maybe they go right into the main subject, and then they paint this, and then they're painting this, and they're kind of all over the place. And that is one surefire way to get really overwhelmed. So here's how not to get overwhelmed. When I start a painting, I start every painting basically the same way, regardless of how complex the subject is. I start every painting the same way. And so painting a complex subject like this is no different than when I paint something much simpler. So the first thing I do is I tone my canvas and I get my elements drawn in to one degree or another. Not too sophisticated, not too detailed, but enough detail that I know I'm going to have what I need. And so then I began to paint the painting, and I follow a painting order. And that painting order is in general, and you'll see me violate that painting order from time to time if you watch me paint, but in general I follow that same painting order, so I don't really have to think about it. So the painting order is left to right, and these were individual paintings, so in each painting I painted left to right, top to bottom, back to front. Now that's the big one that's going to help you here, painting back to front, and then ultimately dark to light in the areas as well. And that's kind of a whole nother subject, but that's a technical thing about it helps facilitate the issue of fat over lean, and that's for another lesson. But so in this painting, when I began this painting, and I'm going to talk about this one because it's the most complex, I'm going to talk about this one the most. And then this other painting, you can see it's essentially I'm doing the same thing. So when I begin with a background because it's the farthest thing back. Now, can you think about more than one thing at a time? I can think about maybe two things at a time, and that's about it. So if you can think of two things at a time, that's probably all you need. So what I did is I started with the dark areas in my background, and I painted in the darks. And then I painted in the dark area of the snow. So that's two things, two values, two sets of shapes. I created this, I painted in all my dark shapes, and then I painted in the dark part of the snow, the blue. Then there's the light side of the snow. And the shadows you can see in the light shot side are a different color than these deep shadows up here that are completely obscured. So there's some shadows that are being cast here, and they're kind of a lighter, almost a violet tone. And so I have two values to work with in the light side as well. So I also then just paint in my lights. I paint in the bright highlights of the snow and the shadows that are going across, being cast across it. And then I continue to work back to front. So I left most of the dark shape here in that creek that's going through, and so I didn't have to worry about that. So as I began to start to detail this up, now all I have left to do is And I leave my trees because there's going to be a lot of texture here. So I don't paint all the way behind everything that's behind because I have my trees drawn in my initial sketch. So I know I don't have to worry about that. So I paint the background around the trees for the most part. I overlap them a little because I want to paint the edges of the trees, and I want that to overlap my background color, but I don't really necessarily have to go all the way through them and obliterate them and redraw them. So I paint around. Got my background colors in. Now I start to put in the details, the fine details of the branches and the brush and the weeds that are back there. And then once I have those in, I can start putting in a few leaves, and I can kind of work back and forth now. I can just now concentrate on this bright area. Same thing, dark to light. I'll put in my dark values, then I'll build it up with the lighter highlights in there, and I get that all done. So once I have that in, then I just put in the minute details, just a few little leaves and a few more branches, and I just go through, put in some little snow highlights and somewhere the light's coming through. I put in those small things. Then I come forward. So the next thing forward is the trees. So I will begin to start on the trunks of the trees, and I'll paint the trees, and I'll paint around where I have the figure drawn in, because I'll overlap it just a little, because I know that when I paint her, I'm going to overlap that paint itself. So then I paint in the trees, and two values. I worry about 2 values at a time. Sometimes in this situation, I'll paint the middle value first, then I'll paint the darks, and then I'll paint the highlighted side, the lit side. And really, you're just painting cylinders when you're painting trees. So if you've done any kind of practice with cylinders, with you know, in your drawing practice or anything, there's a reason that they want you to draw cylinders, because you can use that to paint trees, you can use that to paint arms, all sorts of things you can benefit from having painted cylinders. So now I move into the figure. The figure is the most complex thing. It's going to be the most time consuming, and the thing that I'm going to put the most detail in, because it's my center of interest. I want the viewer to look at the figure. So once again, I will begin to paint from back to front. So the first thing I paint in is, for instance, her cowl neck sweater around the face. So the face is going to be behind the hair, so I'm not going to worry about the hair until I paint in the face. And that cowl neck sweater is going to be in front of the face, but it's in behind in the back, so you kind of work back and forth there from the cowl neck. But so I paint in the hood and her face. Now her face, you'll notice I'm painting in green initially to begin with. It's a little technique I've developed over the years, and we'll do another video and talk about that more. But when I paint skin and figures, I usually like to paint them in like a verdaccio in a green. So I'll tone that face and begin to build it up with flake white for an underpainting, and I'll develop a value study and a map. And so that gives me my values basically, and it gives me my placement. And I can make sure my placement is where it needs to be. I can make sure the nose is where it needs to be, the eyebrow is where it needs to be, the eyes, the corners of the mouth, things like that, to make it hopefully look like the person I'm painting, and at the very least look like a person. So I'll get those in, and then I'll go ahead and just continue on and paint it as if the face was done. And I paint the clothes, once again working top to bottom. I paint the cloak, and since there's a real hard edge on the edge of the cloak, I could have, actually probably should have gone and painted the skirt first and then finished off that edge of the cloak. But once again, like I said, these are not hallowed painting orders. They can be reversed at times if need be. So since that's a nice straight edge, I could just paint the skirt right straight up to that straight edge. I didn't need to overlap my paint. Paint the skirt, put in the details of the skirt, the fine little pattern, and then paint the lace and all the way down to the bottom. And then I'll go back. By that time, the face is fairly well set up, that flake white has fairly well set up, and I'm ready to start putting in some color. So this is the only time I change out. I paint with 3 colors, as you know, and I mix all my colors from those 3 colors. And typically I use titanium white along with those 3 colors. Now when I'm painting skin, I use the flake white in an underpainting, and then I mix my flesh tones with zinc white because it's more translucent, and then I paint that in as well, and then some of that green shows through, and it just gives it a more lifelike feel, because skin has, especially in a cool situation like this, it's going to have some tone to it, and I want some of that to show through. And I can continue to build that up and warm it up as much as I need to if it feels too cold. And then I paint in my highlights with flesh tones that are mixed with titanium white to really cover, and it gives a nice translucency to the skin and a really nice feel. As far as the other side goes, same thing. I did all the background, I worked to the front, got the owl painted in, and then I worked in the leaves. And the final thing is those foreground leaves that come down, and it's the last thing I painted in over top of the girl. And if that is the case, in this case, I didn't leave negative shapes, I just went ahead and painted them. And then I was pretty much done. The only thing I'm not quite done with this painting, I'm going to attempt to put in a little bit of breath here to illustrate like she's breathing and it's cold. And so I'm going to work in a real nice little scumble on her breath. And hopefully you will see that in the final painting. But I've talked a long time. Hopefully you've stuck with me and understand the procedure now. So thank you for tuning in. Happy painting. I'll see you in another lesson from the easel.